Hello there, Shortcuts. This is Stephen here. This is video one for this week. As you know, the price list will go out 9 p.m. on Wednesday evening as always. This is your preview of what's in the list. And yeah, I've been a bit nervous about making this video because I've been sent some things that are they're pretty special. And so the story is that I have been invited to attend a few record fairs recently. And so I reached out to my friends in Shibuya to say that this had happened. And I put some extra money on the table and they said, we'll send you something. And the communications that come are kind of interesting because sometimes it's symbols that I've used, when they describe a record in kind of funny ways for me to realize that it's something special. But also, every so often I'll get an explanation, and it's sometimes not in the most amazing English, but it's so passionate and so fascinating. But for the first time ever, when this box arrived in the middle of last week, they said that there were records in the box that were mint, i.e. that had never been played before, for the first time. It's always been that the vinyl is near mint. That's the kind of the rules that we use. But the sleeves can be more variable. But the vinyl is always great. But never have I been told that something's mint. Now, I have had sealed records. In this case, they sent a series of records, and I'm going to showcase 4 of them here, that they've told me have never been played. Now, one of them has been by me. In fact, 2 have been played by me. And I'll tell you about those experiences in a few minutes. I'm quickly going to show you the sleeves. Now, the limitations of this video format is that you can't see what I see and you can't touch what I can touch. But I will attempt to explain to you why these are in all likelihood mint records. And all 4 of them, well, you'll see. All right, so first thing, let me show you this one. The Right Touch by Duke Pearson. I'll talk about the record in a second, but the first thing is, can you see the sheen? The back of the record is spotless. The spine, faultless. Just Duke Pearson. There's Along Came John, my John Patton. The only one with an OB, and I'll come back to that in a second, is this. The Natural Way by Lou Donaldson. And finally, maybe the record with the most interesting story. This is Coming Your Way by Stanley Turrentine. Again, let me just show you. Almost, these records are so pristine that you cannot help but think, how can these records be 40 years old? I'm only going to show you one of them outside of the wrapper, but they're all Blue Note. I hope you can see just how pristine they are. Absolutely magnificent. Now, all Blue Note, all from the 60s, and all in a funny way intertwined. And I'll explain how in a minute. I think I might start with this one. Stanley Turrentine's Coming Your Way. Tommy Turrentine, Stanley Turrentine, Horace Parland, George Tucker, and Al Harewood on drums. I played this today. Thomasville was, I think, the standout track. But why is the story of this record so incredible? I'm so almost nervous about touching these records because they're that incredible. That record was recorded in 1961 and in the Rudy Van Gelder studio as part of the program of works by Blue Note for that year. But it was shelved, and it's not really clear why, other than it would have been Stanley Turrentine's third release on Blue Note. It was replaced by another Turrentine record, which was the Live at Minton's, which became a standout success for them and spawned further volumes. But this record never made its way out, was never pressed, until a CD compilation in 1977, 1978. So a full 16, 17 years after it was recorded, it made its way out as part of a compilation, but it wasn't pressed onto vinyl until much later than that. I think this pressing, is 83. I haven't done all the research yet, but it's something like that. And you have to ask, what were the folks in Blue Note thinking? They must be cloth-eared. It is an amazing record. I don't understand it. I really enjoy Stanley Turrentine playing with his older brother, Tommy Turrentine, who's a trumpeter, who, remember that name because that's part of the connection. But I really like, there's kind of two saxophonists who, in my journey to jazz that this club has kind of fostered for me. The two that stand out are Ike Quebec, and remember that name because I'm going to come back to him in a minute too, and Stanley Turrentine. And part of the reason is because they have this wonderfully earthy tone that makes the instrument sound really soulful to my ears. I'm well aware that sax playing has been and can be a bit cheesy, but not these guys. They make the instrument breathe and hum. They humanize it in a way. They make it sexy in a way that no one else that plays sax I've heard. And whilst I'm not a jazz aficionado, as I said, this club has kind of been bringing me on the journey. It's part of the pleasures of this club. Stanley Turrentine stands out. Now, in the 70s, he kind of really embraced this like funk, soul, jazz fusion. But this is pure bop. It's a delight. Now, I said there was a link, and I'm going to go to this one next, which is by far and away the most expensive record in the mix. This is Lou Donaldson's The Natural Soul, early 60s as well. In fact, I think maybe even the same year as Stanley Turrentine. And it also features Tommy Turrentine on trumpet, with Grant Green, John Patton, and Ben Dixon. And remember that trio, because you'll hear about them again. So this record is the most expensive record that the folks in Shibuya have ever sent me. So the number is unapologetically high. You'll see on the pricing list. Yeah, it's nosebleed stuff. It's mint. It's perfect. The obi is just magnificent. This was the one I took straight out and played immediately. And I'm perfectly happy for this to remain on my shelf because it is nosebleed expensive. It is like what happens when blues and jazz collide. So on the opening track, which trust me on this, just go and listen. It's called Funky Mama. What you get is this vamping backing track, John Patton on organ, just laying down this really subtle vamp. You get the instrumentalists laying over the top, but the key to this is Grant Green. So Grant Green lays this blues motif that he returns to on about 10 occasions through the song. And every single time it is arresting. You just go, oh, this is one of the coolest pieces of music I've heard in my entire life. The rest of the record's great. You get to the very last track. The last track is called Nice and Greasy. And so what you get there is Lou Donaldson and Grant Green alone. Just the two of them. It is worth the price of entry alone. It is an absolutely beautiful piece of music. And so I feel privileged that these folks in Shibuya have sent me there. Now, typically they will have, pidgin English kind of descriptions of a record. It's basically an essay that accompanied The Natural Soul about how incredible it is. And even that sleeve, look at that. Isn't that just... Now, the key word in that title is soul. I've said it's like when jazz meets blues, but you could use that as a definition of soul. And this record's magnificent. So why did I mention Grant Green, John Patton, and Ben Dixon? Because in those early 60s years of Blue Note, where the genre of kind of soul jazz was becoming a reality, that backing trio of Grant Green, John Patton, and Ben Dixon were kind of became almost like the house band. And so what's magnificent is that John Patton is a subtle genius the whole way through The Natural Soul. His organ does not overpower, which can be the case. So he got a chance to do his own. And what's great is you'll see you get John Patton, Grant Green, Ben Dixon again, but you also get Fred Jackson, Harold Vick, two tenor saxophonists. So this was John Patton's debut. He goes for it. This record is comes out the blocks like a sprinter, and it is dirty and febrile, and the two saxophones kind of just dueling with each other at times, and the genius of Grant Green again, just anchoring everything in these motif riffs that just bring it back. And I tell you what, it's, those three records are intertwined because you got Tommy Turrentine on two of them. You got John Patton, a guy who I didn't know Ben Dixon at all. Obviously Grant Green anchoring the Lou Donaldson record and the John Patton record on their own. And they're mint. They're new, but they're not. They're 40 years old, but they're new. How does this work? I don't understand. The final in the quartet is this. This one's a little bit different. The Right Touch, Duke Pearson. Now, Duke Pearson is a really wonderful jazz pianist, but he's also an A&R man, and he became Blue Note's A&R man when Shortcuts Royalty and one of my heroes, Ike Quebec, passed away. So Ike Quebec passed away very young. I think early mid 60s, or maybe it was 66, 67. I can't remember the exact year. But Duke Pearson took over, and that meant that he got to sit in on recording sessions, and you'll see and hear his piano playing on a lot of Blue Note records in the mid 60s. But he got his chance to lead his own. Now, Freddie Hubbard, Stanley Turrentine, James Spaulding, Jerry Dudgeon, Garnet Brown, Gene Taylor, Grady Tate. These are a new series of names because this record was released in 1967 and became a big hit. Part of what, to my ears, allows Duke Pearson to stand out is that he loved Brazilian salsa music. So even the very first song, which is called Chili Peppers, you can hear the Latin influences, that playfulness. Los Malos Hombre, which is the opening track of side 2, is cut from a similar cloth. But what underpins this record isn't Grant Green. It is Duke Pearson's unbelievably melodious piano playing. It is just aural pleasure. It's wonderful. I'm really running out of time. I could talk on about these 4 records. Anyway, I hope you got a sense of those 4. I was just talking about piano, and last week I showcased Blossom Dearie, wonderful New York pianist. I am going to just highlight this record as well. I know Jacob bought Blossom Dearie's title track, but this is 1957. This is just another wonderfully melodious record with this fantastic voice and quirky personality. One of the club members, Ivan, sent me a note as he's kind of deep diving on Blossom Dearie after last week's video. And he described how some of her live records, she becomes a comedian. She kind of tells jokes, but you can hear that in her music. You can hear the humor. There's not a lot of humor I can talk to you about this next record. All I can, because the history is pretty stark. But all I can tell you is that in all the hubbub around the passing of Tina Turner, who was one of the great female icons of the last century, this record was forgotten. But this is my personal favorite of Tina Turner, and it happens to be one that she did with Ike. And so I'm not going to go into why that's problematic, because at the end of it all, I'm not listening to this record for Ike, I'm listening to it for Tina. And she is incredible on this album. This is 1973, and it's called Feel Good. And I love this image of her on the back. Why is this record so good? It is the dirtiest, sleaziest, funkiest, most low-down record she did, and it suits her. It is so groovy. It is bass heavy. There's some really incredible guitar solos. The some of the song titles are just great just on their own. Kay got laid and Joe got paid. And you know, it's great. And what I love about this particular pressing is because it's a Japanese first pressing, and because in certain situations they would honor what they reckon a great record, they would print it on or press it on red translucent vinyl, which is the case here. So that's rather spectacular. And a wonderful record. This next record makes its way onto regularly the lists of the greatest soul albums of all time. It's also got a sad history because it is the posthumous record, the record that was released shortly after the death of the tragic death of Otis Redding, and it is The Immortal. As Robert Christgau said, and he's one of the all-time great music critics, he said this is the record he played the most. And I think that's probably the greatest tribute I can give it. It's got Hard to Handle, which became hits for all sorts of bands, Black Crowes and others, but nothing trumps the original. And it is a brilliant pressing. This the Soul Age for this 6111A. I've had this many times. I know a bunch of you have it. It's wonderful. I'll quickly whiz through this because this is a typical Japanese compilation that they love compiling. They love compiling James Brown. And so this has got Maybe I'll Understand, It's a Man's World, Try Me, Think, Ain't Got a Groove, Goodbye. So it's more of his kind of slow groove records. This is one for a glass of red wine, as opposed to shaking your rump like some of his records. But it's great. Soul Fire by the mighty James Brown, talking about sipping a red wine. I've got a nice Shiraz. Lovely. All right, just 3 to go. This is a very interesting story as well. This is a record called the Herbie Hancock Trio. And there they are. I think the back sleeve's more interesting than the front in many ways. So that's Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter on bass, Tony Williams on drums. What's notable about this record is it was made in 1977 when Herbie and a bunch of others fully embraced electric jazz. You're talking about Headhunters and, Thrust and all sorts of classic, kind of full-on funkadelic records. But this is an acoustic jazz record. This is Herbie Hancock going back to his roots, going back to the days of Maiden Voyage and before. But the rest of the world wasn't interested in that version of Herbie Hancock, even though he made this beautiful record, and it was only ever released in Japan. It was only ever pressed in Japan. I think until relatively recently. So this is the only way to get the original sound of this, these original or these older Japanese copies. And yeah, if you hanker after a bit of your Herbie Hancock a la Taken Off as opposed to a la Headhunters, it's a delight. All right, 2 more to go. So this is the Staple Singers, City in the Sky. I've been really getting into the Staple Singers this last few years. This is the last record on the Stax label. So they were a staple of the Stax. Oh, there we go. Did you like that pun? The Staple Singers were a staple of the Stax label. But City in the Sky was their last Stax recording. And it's also their most kind of politically potent, but don't think that makes the record worthy. It is an absolute blast. I have a copy and it gets played quite regularly, particularly side one. Side one is is out there and great. And then finally I've got this record. This is a 1963 Riverside first pressing Japanese of Cannonball in Europe, and that being Cannonball Adderley. In this case, recorded live in Belgium, 1963, with his brother Nat Adderley, but also playing in the band is Yusef Lateef, and he is the secret sauce on this record. It's never been sold on Discogs. I think it's very hard to find indeed. Anyway, I thought it'd be a nice way to end the list. If anyone wants to know more about it, just ping me because we're 23 minutes in. If you like the video, please like and comment and all that good stuff. Subscribe if you haven't. Hopefully there's something interesting that you're delving off to explore off the back of that video. Making these videos is interesting because you get one go. And I do finish them often and go, oh, why didn't I say that? Or why did you say that, you fool? So anyway, they are what they are. And I hope you enjoy them. And if you've made it this far, thank you.